In this unit of the internal business environment, we're going to look at managing change. So by the end of this unit, you will be able to analyse the reasons why businesses are having to continually implement change, analyse the drivers, resistors and assets for change, and complete a force field analysis. This is also covered under evaluating business information. Analyse the reasons why people resist change, and describe a range of different strategies businesses can use to successfully introduce change. So on this slide here are a number of examples of how a business can go through change. Mergers and acquisitions, entering new markets, responding to any legal requirements, trading in new currencies, introducing new customer-led strategies. What we really mean by that is taking on board things that customers would like to see happen in your business through reviews, etc. Using new technology, multinationals, becoming a multinational or trans-global business, and changes to your process. For example, it could be that you're now turning towards e-commerce. In this next slide, you will see that we have all our external factors. And these are predominantly the factors that cause change. Change is usually a response to threats or opportunities which exist out with a business. Now, we're not saying that change can't happen internally. It might be you've got a change of management and the organisation has to change in certain ways, but these are the main ways in which a business has to change because of our external factors. So our political factors: economic, social, technological, environmental and competitive. These are just ways in which businesses can change externally, and you will be familiar with all of these through your higher course. So this is the force field analysis. We have talked about force fields, and if businesses are wanting to undergo change, it would be a good idea for them to actually draw up a force field analysis, and that will give them an idea of the drivers, things that drive the change, resistors, things that are obviously going to keep the change, resisting against the change, and you also have to look at assets for change, and we'll speak about them shortly. If the driving force for change is equal to the restrictor or the resistor, then you would be in an equilibrium and you wouldn't bother going ahead with the change. You have to ensure that your drivers are much stronger than your resistors, and that means that the business will go ahead with the change. Anything less than that, you wouldn't bother. And this was a theory adopted by Kurt Lewin. So this is just a diagram of it. You can see here that drivers could be higher salaries, workers committed to change, training in new skills, or a charismatic leader. And you can see that maybe the business, obstacles to the business's change could be the objectives are not clear. You've got a really good corporate culture as it is just now. People are quite happy with the management style that's being used just now, and a bit of a fear of the unknown. Assets for change are things that already exist within the business before the change take place that will actually help the change to go ahead. So another thing that we have to look at are the lengths of the arrows, and the lengths of the arrows determine the force of each element. So you've got to think for yourself, is this particular driver or resistor really strong, in which case you would give it a big arrow, or relatively weak and it's not going to have a huge impact on the change, and that's where you would give it a smaller arrow. Here are some examples on this slide just of drivers for change, different things you could look at here. Now, you will normally be given this question in your case study in your exam paper, and there will be a paragraph about the particular change that's supposed to take place, and you will find the drivers and the resistors in that paragraph, or those paragraphs under that heading anyway. The assets for change could be anywhere else in the case study. So it may be, for example, the business has already got a big reputation, or it could be the business has made a lot of profit up till now and they can afford to go through this change. So anything that exists before would be what we would call an asset for change. So the list is there that you can have a wee look through for yourselves. Assets for change, as I've already said, do not in themselves drive the change and can't be described as drivers, but they do help the change to be successfully implemented. So it might be the examples you've got here. You've got a good backing of finance. You've got finance available to train staff, which means the change might be able to go ahead. It might be you've got support from other stakeholders, your shareholders, your managers, your staff. And that would be something that you could have. You've got a good, strong staff who normally support your organisation. These would be assets for change. This is just a case study that you can have a wee look at here about Merlin, the owners of Legoland and Alton Towers, to draw up a wee force field analysis, and that's just it there. These are all just examples of tasks that you can do. So usefulness then, you could be asked in an exam about how useful a force field is. I would think that they're giving you 8 marks for this already. The chances of you getting a question like this on top of that would be quite slim, but it's worth knowing anyway. So the advantages then of a force field is you can gather all the information you require in one place, and it can also help you to identify any constraints early that will allow you to eliminate or reduce them. So any resistors, you could maybe try to do something about those resistors to eliminate them or reduce them, certainly. The disadvantages are it's time consuming to gather information. Factors change all the time, so you might miss any new information or you might be using out of date information. They're not specific, they're not very detailed, they are just very brief. So you would really have to go into the ins and outs of each, and in your question, in your force field analysis in your paper, you will be asked to analyse the drivers, the resistors and the assets for change, which means you've got to go into them in a little bit more depth. The diagram itself is not detailed and they are subjective. It's really up to the person who is actually drawing up the force field analysis as to whether they think it actually is a driver or a resistor and how strong or weak it is. Now we're going to look at the stages of change, and this is once again down to this guy called Kurt Lewin, who was very much into change, and he identified 3 stages in the change process. The first one is unfreezing, and that's when you are trying to break down beliefs and assumptions that currently exist. So for an organisation to be ready for change, you have to unfreeze. You have to break down anything that already exists in the organisation. The change is actually the process itself, so the change that you're going to implement. And the refreezing is where you have now implemented that change. You are now basically solidifying that state, that new state, once the changes have been implemented. So these are just things that you would do under each of the stages. So under the unfreezing stage, you would identify any changes or problems that crop up using research techniques to find out how the change is going to take place. It might be you generate lots of different ideas from different people to come up with good solutions. Consulting your staff is probably really important too about the change that's going to come ahead. You're trying to pave the way for the staff. You do have to have trust and reassurance. You have to gain your employees' trust and reassurance that this is going to be good and it's going to work out. Getting them used to the idea is really important too. And breaking down any previous beliefs or assumptions around this change. As far as the transforming or the change itself, okay, you're going to be introducing perhaps new technology, work patterns, products, services, etc. So that could be the change. You have to try and achieve the desired outcomes. By doing that, by making the change happen, you have to develop new behaviours and new values. Employees should be allowed to express their opinions so that you can do any tweaking if it has to happen. If employees take the change well, then it might be worthwhile rewarding them, whether it's even praise or any other motivators. And it's important to realise when the goals have been met as far as the change is concerned. What you then have to do is solidify or set that new change, the change, and set it in place. This will become the new normal, the new familiar. That you've got to be careful that you're not rigid. Remember, you can actually tweak these if there's something that's not quite right. Make sure you reinforce the change to staff so that they know they're not doing the old thing, now they're doing the new thing. Consolidate this new state as well, which is just similar. Prevent regression. Make sure employees are not going back to the old ways of thinking. They are sticking with this new way. And make sure you evaluate to check that the change has actually been good, it's been positive for the company. And also, you have to make sure that you've got resources and support there for your staff to be able to sustain this change. Lewis's 3-step model can be expanded, and the next couple of slides just show you how this can be different. And you'll see there that instead of 3 changes here, you've got many more than that. But all you're doing there is you're really talking about recognising the need for change, defining the problem, identifying where you're going, searching for alternatives, where you want to be, Preparing for change, these are all really just the very start part of it. This is you building up to the unfreezing stage, loosening it so that it can change. The conscious process of moving to the change and arriving at it is the actual change process itself, and then refreezing and evaluating. So this is really just the model in a number of other steps. And you can actually chop that down just a little bit there to you realise that things have to change. Prepare your staff for the change. Unfreeze the organisation by getting everything ready for the new process, managing the change process itself, working towards it, refreezing, and then evaluating. And this is a 6-step process of change that is an adaptation of Kurt Lewin's model. So the stages of change then, what are the benefits of it then? Because the change is in stages, you can actually transition very much easier to the new environment. The organisation will be able to support the changes implemented because you're ready for it. Individuals will know how the changes will affect them and the role they play because they've all been prompted on it. The new system will be better understood because you've gone through it carefully. People will be aware of how their role or their responsibilities have changed. Everyone will be motivated and committed to the change programme because they've been buying into it from the start. Good communication will ensure people know what will happen. They'll buy into it and the changes are more likely to be successful. The success of the programme will be monitored and measured. That's when you're talking about evaluation, and all employees within the company will be behind the new organisation or the process which has been changed. And then that means that you have actually achieved the goals of the programme. There are a number of exam questions on change. This was a 2015 one, so relatively recent. And just to give you an idea of what a change question would really be like. Change is an integral part of a dynamic business, a business that's changing all the time, obviously. Describe the stages of change and assess the importance of managing each stage effectively. And that's a 10 marker. The way you would go about that is you would talk about each of the stages individually, the unfreezing, the change itself and the refreezing according to Kurt Lewin's model, and then you would have to talk about the importance of managers making sure that each stage is managed correctly so that employees are actually going to bring about the change. Now, when companies are obviously considering making change, one of the things they really have to take into account is resistance to change. The fact that some of their staff will not be prepared to take that change on board or be less keen to take the change on board. So organisations and employees may be reluctant to change, which can often bring about uncertainty and risk. Now, what we're going to look at here are some of the barriers, the common barriers to change, things that stop the change taking place. Employee fear. Employees by nature don't particularly like change. So there's the fear of the unknown. They don't know what's coming up, so they're not really sure about it. So employee fear is one. Resource limitations, it could be there's resistance to change because the organisation, the employees, the managers feel that perhaps there aren't enough resources available the resources are not good enough to enable them to actually carry out the change. Uncertainty is quite similar to fear, just this not knowing what's going to be taking place and how it's going to pan out. That's another thing. Resistance itself, just people genuinely just sticking their head in the sand and not being interested, just totally resisting it, being quite stroppy about it and not wanting it. So let's look at them individually and see where it goes. So employee fear then. Employees can fear changes they believe it might lead to job losses. A lot of change that's happened recently in organisations may be that they're changing towards technology and employees are starting to lose their jobs, so there could be a fear of that. Improvements in technology, here we go, might result in job losses as businesses become more automated. As technology improves, some employees might feel that they're unable to keep pace with the change and they'll not understand or be able to work the new machinery. So if they are kept on, then it might be that they feel they're frightened of what's coming and frightened of actually having to learn to use new technology. This is particularly pertinent among older employees who feel pressurised, as young employees do tend to come in and have a very, very different approach and much more energy than your older employees. Now, as far as resource limitations are concerned, sometimes a business wants to change, but they've not necessarily got the equity or the capital to enable the change to take place. So things like bringing in new investors might not be ideal, as the new investors might not be happy with the way the business is going or choosing to go, and they might want to take the business in a totally different direction. It could be also that the business is not able to take on a loan because it may result in cash flow problems for them, and you'll be aware of cash flow problems because we spoke about this at Hire. So you've got to pay back the loan in instalments, and that could lead to cash flow issues for the organisations. Just general uncertainty. The fear of the unknown and the uncertainty can be enough to stop change from occurring. Businesses, like people, can get into their comfort zone too easily and be wary of making changes in case the result backfires. So businesses are maybe just kind of jogging along as they are, and they feel that by making the change, it could actually not work out for them. Finally, resistance. Change is difficult for everyone. A business wishing to change needs to ensure that enough of the workforce are behind the change, as ultimately they are ones who are going to be driving the change forward daily. So if you have employees digging their heels in and they're not prepared to do it, you're going to have a pretty difficult job trying to implement the change. Now, this next slide is really just a little task with a little paragraph from a speech made by a trade union official at a meeting with factory managers, and they want you to read the little passage and identify each example of a barrier to change that there are in the table. And what you'll find is the little table over here. So you've got to give an example of where communication problems arose, fear of redundancy arose, lack of skills in the workforce arose, etc. And you have to be able to do that. This next slide actually gives you the solutions. So you can have a wee go at that, and then the solutions are on this slide and you can check your answers. So how can we support employees through change? And there are a number of things to do here, and there's a list of them. Negotiation and agreement. Try and sit them down, have a chat with them, negotiate with them, trying to say, well, if you do this, this is going to happen. It might end up you get bonuses for it, and try to get them to agree. Another thing is make sure they're well trained. So training and development, we spoke about this at Hire too, is really, really important for employees to feel comfortable about the job they're doing. So if they're going to accept or embrace this change, they have to be trained and developed to do that. Another thing, of course, naturally is communication. Make sure you're communicating with them regularly and let them see how things are panning out and where we're at, the situation we're at. It is really important that they participate and they get involved. So maybe give them some ideas to mull over and let them give you their thoughts, etc. That's really, really important. For employees who are maybe not quite coping with the change the same way, make sure you've got counselling in place. If it's going to be such a big change for them and they're not able to cope with it, then make sure you've got some counselling in place for them. Another thing to do is maybe have staff working in teams. As we know, staff are an awful lot more comfortable working in teams and they're prepared to take more risks. So maybe implementing change in the organisation, that might be the way to go. Have them working with a mentor, have them working in a team, and they're maybe more prepared to take the risks there. Introduce it gradually. Try not to, basically bring in the change in one big fell swoop, because that would maybe unnerve the employees and make them feel a bit overwhelmed. So maybe try to introduce the change more gradually, and that might mean that your employees are able to embrace it better. As we said already, with bonuses, rewards and incentives, this could be a way for you to earn more money. This could be a way for you to get a bonus and try to encourage the staff. There are situations when you might be able to work from home at times, and these are all rewards and incentives that you could use for employees. If necessary, if it gets to the end of it and you feel as though the employees are still not embracing this after all the strategies you're putting in place, then you really maybe have to start trying to persuade. Threats perhaps the wrong thing to do, but that would be really, really a last resort if you're intending to implement this change. So what we're going to look at now is we're going to look at different approaches to managing change, and there are a number of approaches, quite a common exam question, so just make sure you're familiar with these different approaches to managing change. So the first one is action-centred. We call this an action-centred approach to change, and it's very much a practical approach that's driven by finding a solution to a problem. So what we have is we have an issue, we have a problem here, and we realise that things have to change to be able to address that problem. So it's really important that once you've identified the problem, you discuss with your staff possible solutions, possible ways of trying to deal with or solve that problem. So what businesses could do is they pilot one solution perhaps in a targeted small area, and depending upon its success, implement the solution on a more widespread basis, or pilot an alternative until you get success. So it might be that one area, that a very, very long time ago, the UK government tried this with something called the poll tax, which came before the council tax, and they realised that the way of collecting what we originally called rates from the population had to change because it wasn't working properly. And what they did was they decided to bring in this initiative called the poll tax. It's worth a wee Google to find out what it was all about. But what they did was they were a bit afraid to do a universal change. So what they did was they piloted this in no place other than Scotland. They realised after a couple of years of running this that it wasn't going to work out, but what it meant was it wasn't very good for the Scottish people because we got landed with it. However, it let them see it wasn't going to work and it didn't cause too much disruption or too much damage. So what they had to then do was come in with an alternative solution, and that's when we ended up with what we have now, the council tax. The second approach is the top-down approach, and this approach is achieved when management decide what to do. So it's very much an autocratic or authoritarian style of management. It's imposed on the business and its employees, and we kind of say it's more of an autocratic or authoritarian management style. Now, to be honest with you, this is maybe not ideal because communication is directed from the top and little or no attention is paid to the ideas of employees. So employees don't really have a say here. With this approach. It's normally used for large one-off changes in response to an emergency. So we already know that if something has to be brought in the case of an emergency, then it's really, really important that managers implement it quickly. It has to be implemented quickly. So it could be you have to deal with, in this particular instance here, a change in legislation. You can't hang about. It's got to be done by a certain date. So this would be where managers come up with a theory with no input at all from staff and they implement that. You can see that there are issues with that and it's not necessarily the best. Negotiated is the third type of way of managing change, and it's the opposite of top-down. It's reached through a bargaining process between employers, employees and any other stakeholders who may be involved. Now, communication flows both ways, with managers making use of employees' ideas and opinions. This is very much more like a democratic style, if you like, the negotiated style. Trade unions might be involved to ensure that the voice of all employees is heard, or it could be through Works Council. So you can see it's very, very much getting staff involved, which is quite a good way of doing that. Something quite similar is the participative approach, and it's very similar to negotiated as it says here. It's the result of discussion and consensus among people involved. This is shown by complete confidence and trust between managers and employees. So the managers know the employees do a good job. The managers know that the employees are doing the job on a day-to-day basis and probably have more ideas than them. So it's really important that they participate in it. So it's not just negotiated, it's more participation. Employees are free to discuss their jobs and any ideas that they come up with are welcome. So they are participating. There's a lot of communication and cooperation in this. Feedback is used for problem solving, and so that the people who participate will be committed to implementing the change. If people help to come up with the change, if they participate in the change, then it's more likely that the change is going to be successful because they feel part of it. Motivation increases as employees feel empowered through their part of the process. So that's a really, really important way of doing it. Finally, we've got the piecemeal initiative or the piecemeal approach to change, and this is where the organisation is implementing change in a piecemeal fashion, which really means small incremental changes being made over time. Now, we've already talked about this, and we've said how important it is for organisations to perhaps do this, take things step by step, because what you'll find is that you'll be able to build the confidence of your staff, and it's less risky, if you like, to take smaller steps, because what you can do is you can take one step, and if it doesn't work out, you can change direction at less cost, or if it does work out, you can then move on to the next stage, and that's really quite important. If a change isn't working out, it can be reversed before the whole change is complete. So that's a really, really good way of implementing change. I have to say, it doesn't work if the organisation is having to implement change in an emergency type situation. Now we're going to look at change agents and the role of change agents. Now, change agents are the people responsible for bringing about change. They can be anyone. They could be individuals, groups of employees, experts from outside the organisation, or a combination of these people. Change agents can be instrumental in ensuring that the change takes place. So it might be that you bring someone into the organisation who is an expert, and they'll be the main person. They'll be the people who will be making sure that the change goes ahead effectively. They take the lead in working out what the issues are. In other words, we're thinking about the drivers and the resistors, back to our force field analysis here. And they manage employees' expectations and set realistic goals. So they know what employees, how the change should take place. This is a really complex change, so let's do it in a piecemeal fashion. Or this change has to be done because it's an emergency. We really have to do it from a kind of top-down approach. So that's how they'll work it. They can also inspire and educate colleagues and ease their concerns through the process. So that's really important as well. They are there to make employees feel better. So just another slide here on the role of change agents. They may be responsible for groups of colleagues if using the negotiated or participative approach. So these are the ones where we are using employees' opinions, etc. Or they can be key to choosing the correct pilot if using an action-centred or piecemeal approach. So, they'd be the ones who would basically, have someone who is going to steer the action-centred or piecemeal approach. Where a lack of expertise is evident, change agents are responsible for buying in expert consultants. So it might be that they look around the staff, they look at the management who are there, and they decide that maybe the staff are not capable of making this change themselves, and it would be their job then to buy in expert consultants to do the job. They can then coordinate with management to ensure that the process is smooth. So they can bring in management consultants, and these guys will be able to look at the organisation, look at the problems, and decide how the change can take place. Which is really, really helpful. They will monitor and control the change process, ensuring that all the interested parties are kept fully briefed throughout. So they are really experts in this, so they know how to carry out change. The final slide in this presentation is about barriers to an effective change agent. So what could stop an effective change agent doing their job effectively? One is lack of experience in managing the change. Internal change agents may not have coordinated change in the past, but they'll be familiar with the firm's policies and practice. However, external change agents, if they come in from outside, they will not be familiar with the firm's policies and practice to the same extent, so that might be a barrier to them. The degree of skill of the change agent is also something to be taken into account. External change agents are likely to have greater expertise in dealing with change in a variety of situations, and that's because they've had a lot more practice at it. And the other thing is that's their job. So it's not that you're bringing in a manager of your own company and they're the change agent. These people are actually qualified in doing that job. The next thing is the degree of respect and charisma of the change agent. Are people going to buy into the change agent and their ideas, or are they going to resist it? So external change agents, because people don't know them, they're unknowns, they might face greater resistance from staff. Another thing is the organisation's culture. It might be hard to break down, it might be quite traditional, and that might make it difficult to implement the change. And finally, the lack of resources, as we spoke about already, they are a barrier to change, but they can be a barrier to an effective change agent as well. Maybe not enough funding, the staff aren't qualified enough, maybe they've not got enough staff in the first place, the technology and ICT might not be there. So these things will all be barriers to an effective change agent, i.e. a change agent being able to do their job properly.